I feel compelled to spend a few precious moments of my allotted time to register my concern, indeed, my alarm, at the breakneck speed at which this committee is operating. This committee has been convened to study the potential impacts of expanding eligibility for medical aid in dying to include ill and disabled people who are not dying. Those in charge of this committee are very aggressively rushing the important and complex work of the committee. All of this is happening in the middle of a global pandemic, when our focus as a country has been on taking measures to protect the lives of our most vulnerable citizens. At best, this is extremely ironic. At worst, it is hypocritical, irresponsible, and extremely unethical. As someone who relies on assistive and augmentative communication, I had to request additional time beyond the 2.5 minutes allotted for my testimony. This incident illustrates the reality of systemic ableism. Within a society designed by and for typically functioning people, ableism causes the support needs of people with disabilities to be viewed as excessive and unsustainable. This has enormous and very dangerous implications for the expansion of MAID. Disability scholar, Veronica Schwiena-Erd, defines ableism as ideas, practices, institutions and social relations that presume able-bodiedness, and by so doing, construct persons with disabilities as marginalized, and largely invisible others. Like racism and sexism, ableism classifies entire groups of people as less than, and perpetuates harmful stereotypes, misconceptions, and generalizations about people with disabilities. Unlike racism or sexism, however, ableism remains, in the words of Canadian disability scholar, Gregor Wolbring, one of the most societally entrenched and accepted isms. People with disabilities are at a higher risk of suicide due to systemic and internalized ableism. Yet they face substantial barriers when trying to access suicide prevention services. Medical professionals overlook typical sources of stress, problems arising from relationship breakdowns, depression, and isolation are wrongly attributed to disability. The removal of reasonably foreseeable natural death as a limiting eligibility criterion for the provision of MAID will result in people with disabilities seeking MAID as an ultimate capitulation to a lifetime of ableist oppression. In a truly just and progressive society, suicide prevention measures should be applied equally to all people. More and more Canadians with disabilities find themselves in extreme financial distress as the pandemic drives up costs while already meager provincial income support remains stagnant. What's more, some provinces have recently been publicly musing about reducing, or altogether scrapping, their income support programs for people with disabilities. Recent news reports indicate that some people with disabilities living in poverty are being driven to end their lives through MAID, because they lack the means to survive. Physicians report that patients with disabilities are requesting MAID upon learning that the wait time for accessible housing with the supports they require is 10 years or more. Given the demonstrated ongoing prevalence of ableism in Canada, the Council of Canadians with Disabilities is recommending the following amendments to Bill C-7 in hopes of limiting the bill's capacity to weaponize ableism in this country. 1. Receipt of adequate housing, income support, palliative care and home-based services should be prerequisite eligibility requirements for MAID. The onus for providing these supports at the level required must fall on governments. A person with disabilities should never bear the burden of trying to lobby for adequate supports. 2. Refer to the Supreme Court of Canada, by way of constitutional reference, Bill C-14's existing protections limiting MAID to cases where a person's natural death is reasonably foreseeable. 3. Any changes to Canada's MAID law must meaningfully respond to last year's end of mission statement of the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, wherein Ms. Catalina Devandas Aguilar communicated her serious concerns about significant shortcomings in the way all levels of Canadian government respect, protect and fulfill the rights of persons with disabilities. Specifically, she noted that there was a lack of protocol to demonstrate that persons with disabilities have been provided with viable alternatives when eligible for assistive dying and that she had received worrisome claims about persons with disabilities in institutions being pressured to seek medical assistance in dying, and practitioners not formally reporting cases involving persons with disabilities. 4. Canada's amended medical assistance in dying law should follow the judicial directive of the SCC in Carter, which required a carefully designed system that imposes stringent limits that are scrupulously monitored and enforced. 5. Remove Bill C-7's provision allowing a disabled person's healthcare or personal care provider to be an eligible witness to that person's request for aid. 6. Retain Bill C-14's mandatory 10-day waiting period requirement, as it currently stands, and the requirement for independent verification of all made requests by 2 witnesses. 7. In response to the prevalence of medical ableism, add language to Bill C-7 that will ensure that all discussions surrounding MAID are patient-led and not prematurely initiated by the physician. 8. Remove Bill C-7's provisions waiving Bill C-14's important and necessary final consent requirements. Bill C-7 will enshrine a lethal form of ableism into Canadian law by making medical assistance in dying a legally sanctioned substitute for the provision of community-based supports to assist people with disabilities to live. The Council of Canadians with Disabilities, along with the entire disability rights community in Canada, is therefore pleading with policymakers to rethink and revise Bill C-7 in light of the reality of systemic ableism. You must ensure that MAID does not weaponize systemic ableism in Canada.